right, so get this. We're going deep today, diving into this article, Pitchforks to an Android Fight.
Huh?
And wow, it looks like we are going to uncover how class and power, that whole thing has been going on forever.
Yeah, throughout history.
And how tech, like AI, is kind of changing everything.
It really does feel like we're at this tipping point.
It's going to be good.
It's a fascinating area, right? This whole mechanics of power and how they change and adapt. And it really kind of boils down to something we've been grappling with forever.
Right.
How do those in control stay in control? And what happens when things start to
unravel?
Yeah, exactly. Unravel.
Yeah. And with AI coming in now, it's like
who knows?
a whole other level.
Yeah. So where do we even begin with this? Unpacking how this struggle has been going on for centuries.
I think a good place to start is just acknowledging that while history might not repeat,
right,
it definitely rhymes. There are these patterns.
Oh, I like that.
That show up again and again.
Like a blueprint. Almost like a blueprint for how to maintain control. And the article points to 4 tactics that have been used across time in different societies.
Okay, I'm listening.
So you've got institutions, controlling those. Monopolizing violence.
Whoa, okay.
Divide and conquer.
Oh, we've heard that one.
And then a really interesting one, accommodation.
Yeah, accommodation. So like working with...
concession.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So it feels like we're at this turning point where those tactics maybe aren't working as well. Maybe there's a new one emerging.
It's like the old playbook is being rewritten in a way.
I like that.
But to understand why this moment feels different, we need to look back and see how these tactics have played out in different societies.
Okay, so let's get into the weeds a little bit.
Let's get specific.
Let's do it.
One example that comes to mind is India's caste system.
Okay.
It's like the definition of institutional control.
Because it's built into the entire...
Totally. It pre-assigns your place in society.
So you could be the smartest, most talented person, but if you're born into a certain caste...
It doesn't matter.
You're kind of stuck.
Exactly.
Right.
It's about controlling the flow of what the article calls energy.
Energy.
Think of it as resources, opportunities, even knowledge.
Okay, so like power itself.
Exactly. At the root of these power struggles is who gets to control those things.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
The article argues it's the common thread.
Okay, so we've got the caste system as one example.
Right.
What are some other ways we've seen this control of energy play out?
Well, think about the imperial Chinese examination system.
Okay.
To become an official, you had to master these Confucian texts.
Oh, wow.
It ensured that the people in charge were steeped in the ideology that supported the existing power structure.
So it's not enough to just be smart.
Right.
You have to think the right way, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is you see echoes of this even today.
Really?
Think about things like restrictive professional licensing,
Okay.
legacy admissions at universities,
Oh, yeah.
the influence of money in politics.
Right.
These are all ways that access to power and opportunity are controlled.
It's amazing how these patterns repeat themselves.
It makes you wonder if we ever really learn.
Right, because we can look back and see where things went wrong.
But do we change course?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what makes this moment with technology so pivotal.
Yeah, because it feels different this time.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And potentially in ways we can't even fully grasp yet.
Okay, so we've been talking about control in a somewhat abstract sense.
Laying the groundwork.
Exactly. But power dynamics aren't always so subtle.
That's true.
Sometimes those in control have to resort to more well-direct methods.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Let's go there.
It's like we're stepping into the danger zone now, right? Where the gloves come off.
Give me the historical rundown on how violence has been the go-to move throughout history.
Well, if we're talking control through violence, you got to look at the gunpowder empires.
Okay, like who are we talking about?
The Ottomans, the Mughals, back in the 16th, 17th centuries.
The big empires.
They built their whole thing on firepower cannons, specifically.
Because if you could blow stuff up,
right,
you're in charge.
Control over who had the weapons, who knew how to use them, that was their power base.
Makes sense, and it's not like things have changed that much, right?
Exactly, and the article makes this really interesting connection to the Second Amendment in the U.S.
Okay, how so?
Well, it's often framed as this individual liberty thing, right?
The right to bear arms.
Exactly, but it also fits into this pattern of those in power wanting to keep a handle on violence.
Wow, that's a really interesting way to look at it, especially with all the debates around gun control these days.
It's a complex issue for sure, and then you add technology into the mix.
Right, because it's not just guns anymore.
Exactly. We're talking drones, cyber warfare, even the increasing militarization of police forces.
It feels like the tools of violence are changing faster than ever.
and becoming even more powerful.
It's a lot to process.
It really is, and that's even before we get to AI.
Oh boy.
But for now, let's bring it back to those tactics for control.
Right. We talked about institutions controlling those, monopolizing violence, and
Divide and conquer.
that's the one that always gets me because it feels like
And never goes away.
exactly. It's like this constant throughout history.
It's the oldest trick in the book, turn the oppressed against each other.
So they're too busy fighting amongst themselves to see who's really pulling the strings.
Exactly. So how does it work?
Yeah, break it down for me.
3 steps.
Yeah.
First, you gotta have a scapegoat, someone to blame for everything.
Oh yeah. Find a group that's an easy target.
Immigrants, minorities, anyone who seems different or threatening.
It's so easy to see how that plays out.
Right, and once you've got the scapegoat, step 2 is to create a strong group identity in opposition to them.
So it's not just about blaming the other, it's about defining yourself against them.
And that's when things get really dangerous.
Because then you start seeing the demonization of anyone who tries to bridge the divide.
It's like empathy and critical thinking go right out the window.
It's scary how easily we can get pulled into that kind of us versus them mentality.
Because it plays on our deepest fears and insecurities.
So true.
And it can manifest in really subtle ways, too.
Like what?
Think about clothing.
Clothing?
Yeah, throughout history, it's been used to mark people as different or belonging to a certain group.
Okay, I see what you mean, like uniforms or religious attire.
Exactly. But it can be even more insidious than that. Think about the yellow Star of David that Jews were forced to wear in Nazi Germany.
Right, a way to instantly identify and target a group.
Exactly. These visual cues, they might seem small, but they can be really powerful tools for division.
It's a good reminder that control often operates on multiple levels.
Absolutely. So we've got the scapegoat, we've got the group identity. What's the final piece?
Yeah, what's the last step in this divide and conquer playbook?
Controlling the narrative.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's about shaping the way people perceive events, framing even harmful actions as necessary for the greater good.
So it's like we have to do this even if it's a little messed up because the stakes are so high.
Exactly. And it creates this loop where anyone who questions authority is seen as a traitor or an enemy.
That's terrifying.
It is because it shuts down dissent and reinforces the power structure.
It makes you wonder, is there any way to break free from this cycle of control?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Because it feels like we're constantly being manipulated.
We are to some extent, that's the nature of power, but it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, give me some hope here.
There are ways to resist to reclaim agency, and it starts with understanding the tactics being used against us.
So how do we even begin to push back against something so ingrained in, well, everything?
Well, the article points to a 4th tactic that those in power have used throughout history.
Yeah.
Accommodation.
Accommodation, like making concessions.
Exactly, and it's important to note this is the rarest of the 4 tactics.
Because it requires those in power to actually give something up.
Right. It usually only happens when they feel like they have more to lose by holding on.
So when they're backed into a corner, basically.
In a way, but when it does happen, it can lead to real change.
Okay, so give me some historical examples of accommodation actually working.
Well, one that comes to mind is the dismantling of apartheid in South Africa.
Okay, yeah, that was a huge turning point.
For decades, the white minority government there enforced this brutal system of racial segregation and oppression, but through a combination of internal resistance, international pressure, economic sanctions, they were forced to concede power.
So it's like they realized holding on was actually more costly than letting go.
Exactly, and the article suggests that this kind of pressure can come from different sources, organized movements, economic shifts, even technological advancements.
It's interesting because we often think about technology as being used to control people, but it can also be a tool for liberation.
Absolutely, and that's a perfect segue into the final part of this whole conversation because this is where the article gets really interesting. It connects these historical power dynamics to the rise of artificial intelligence.
Right, because AI has the potential to completely reshape the balance of power.
Exactly, and this is where it's helpful to look back and see how technology has already been used to chip away at the power of everyday people.
Even before AI came along.
Exactly. Think about the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
Incredible advancements,
Yeah.
right? But it also led to mass displacement of workers.
Right, because machines started taking over jobs.
And the wealth and power got concentrated in the hands of factory owners and industrialists.
Okay, so technology is a tool for both progress and disruption.
Exactly. And then globalization and outsourcing took that a step further,
Right, companies could move their operations to countries with cheaper labor.
which weakened the bargaining power of workers in more developed countries.
Now we have automation and the gig economy doing something similar, just in different ways.
Exactly. And what the article suggests is that AI has the potential to accelerate all of these trends.
So we're talking about a future where a small group controls the algorithms and the machines.
While a vast majority are left behind in an economy where their skills are no longer valued.
It's like those dystopian sci-fi movies where the robots take over and humans are left to fight over scraps.
Well, hopefully it won't be quite that dramatic, but the article does raise some important questions about where we're headed.
Like, what are some specific ways that AI could be used to concentrate power even more?
Well, for one, AI can be used to wage war without the same moral dilemmas that humans face.
So we're talking autonomous weapons drones that can make decisions without human intervention.
Exactly. And that changes the whole calculation of warfare because there's no public outcry, no grieving families putting pressure on governments to end conflicts.
It's a chilling thought, and that's not even getting into the potential for AI to be used for surveillance and control.
Which is already happening to some extent with things like facial recognition technology, predictive policing algorithms, the vast amounts of data being collected about our online activity.
And the scary thing is, most people have no idea how much data is being collected about them.
It's like this invisible web of surveillance that's constantly growing and evolving, and AI could make it even more pervasive.
So it feels like we're at this crossroads where we have to decide how we want to use this incredibly powerful technology.
Do we want to use it to create a more just and equitable world, or do we want to let it further entrench existing power structures?
Those are some really big questions.
They are, and the article doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
But it does a good job of laying out the stakes.
And hopefully getting people to think critically about the future we're creating.
Right, because we can't just sit back and let things play out on their own.
Exactly. We need to be informed, engaged, and willing to challenge the status quo.
It's like that old saying, knowledge is power.
It's true. The more we understand about how these systems work, the better equipped we are to change them.
Well said. This has been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation.
I've enjoyed it.
And listener, we hope it sparks some important questions for you too, because the future of AI is ultimately up to all of us.
It's not some predetermined outcome. It's a story that's still being written.
And we all have a role to play in shaping that story. So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. Until next time.